So today, we're going to dig into something pretty interesting. How managing chemicals can go from being a huge corporate risk to, believe it or not, a real competitive advantage. It's this fascinating meeting point of environmental strategy and business innovation. All right, let's kick things off with a question. What if a company's biggest, most dangerous risk wasn't something you could find on its balance sheet? Not debt or inventory, but something way less tangible, but just as damaging. This is the kind of thing that's keeping a lot of investors and executives up at night. Well, to get a handle on this, a whole new kind of corporate scorecard is starting to pop up. This one goes way beyond the usual financials to try and capture these hidden risks, and more importantly, the opportunities. Let's take a closer look. Okay, a really key player here is the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or SASB. They're now part of the IFRS Foundation, and their whole goal is to create a common language, one that's actually relevant to the bottom line, for companies to talk about sustainability. The best way to think about these standards is like a nutrition label for a company's non-financial performance. And it's not a one-size-fits-all deal. Nope. There are 77 different standards, and each one is custom-tailored to a specific industry, whether you're talking software or seafood. This makes sure the information is actually useful. So how do they actually build these things? Well, each standard is built on this really clear four-pillar structure. First, it defines the industry itself. Then it identifies the most critical sustainability topics for that industry. From there, it gives specific metrics to measure performance, and finally, technical protocols to make sure everyone's measuring the same way. It's a super rigorous framework, and it's all about clarity and being able to compare apples to apples. To really see how this works in the real world, let's zoom in on one specific and pretty high-stakes industry: oil and gas services. These are the companies that do all the heavy lifting for energy exploration. I'm talking about the ones drilling the wells, building all the complex equipment, and providing support services like monitoring and survey. They're the backbone of the industry, usually working on a contract basis. Now, as you can see here, this industry faces a ton of critical issues, from emissions all the way to worker safety. But for this explainer, we're going to zero in on one that carries enormous regulatory and reputational risk: chemicals management. Specifically, we're talking about the fluids used in hydraulic fracturing. And this leads us right into a massive conflict for the industry, something we can call the fracking fluid dilemma. And look, this isn't some academic exercise. As the SASB standard itself points out, public concern over the chemicals in these fluids is very, very real. It's already led to outright bans in some places, new laws, and just intense regulatory pressure. That's a direct, immediate business risk. So you can see the two sides of the conflict laid out pretty clearly here. For the companies, you've got the risk of product bans, new rules, and serious damage to their reputation. On the other side, you have the public, who are deeply worried about water contamination, the use of hazardous chemicals, and the secrecy around what's actually in these proprietary formulas. It's a classic standoff. But what if this standoff wasn't the end of the story? What if this hazard, this huge risk, could actually be flipped into a competitive advantage? This is where transparency really starts to change the game. So the SASB standard cuts through all the noise by asking companies to disclose just two simple yet incredibly powerful numbers related to their fracking operations. Okay, metric number one is super straightforward: the total volume of fluid used. This just establishes the scale of a company's chemical footprint. You can think of it as the baseline. But this is where things get really, really interesting. The second metric asks, what percentage of all that fluid is actually classified as hazardous? This single number tells you almost everything you need to know about the risk profile of a company's products. Are they just sticking with the old hazardous stuff, or are they innovating and moving towards safer alternatives? And just like that, you see this powerful business case for innovation just appear. A company that can get its percentage hazardous number down isn't just cutting risk, it's creating a massive opportunity. They can start marketing safer products, they can grab market share from competitors, they can meet this growing demand from customers for safety, and they can get way ahead of future regulations. So this one example, it actually shows us a really powerful dynamic, which is how targeted transparency can be a direct engine for innovation. See, what's so smart about these standards is they don't just point out a problem and leave it at that. By defining exactly what to measure, they're basically drawing a map, a clear path to a solution. And this isn't just about a quick fix, right? The whole point is to get companies thinking long term. We're talking about actively replacing those hazardous chemicals with safer options, totally redesigning processes to use fewer chemicals in the first place, and even building green chemistry principles into the very DNA of new product development. So here's the big takeaway, the key idea for this whole explainer. What starts out as just a mandatory risk disclosure can become the spark, the catalyst for real innovation that leads to products that are safer, better, and way more competitive. And that leaves us with one final big question. If this kind of transparency can turn a chemical hazard into a huge business opportunity, where else could this model be applied? What other really complex problems are just sitting out there waiting to be solved, not by more top-down rules, but by the focused, clarifying power of disclosure?